This is Gouache, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Welcome to Gouache 101. Oh, backwards. Hi, here's a tube of gouache. How do I put it? Gouache is kind of like oil paint, but not. It's kind of like acrylic paint, but it's not. It's kind of like watercolor, but it's not. It's its own little merry beast. First of all, it's cheap. It's inexpensive for full-on color. What I also like about it is that it's very portable, small, compact, water washable, so it's water mixable, so you can use it anywhere. How I really got turned on to gouache is mostly through books from the late 40s, early 50s, and 60s in ad art. Advertising art always used gouache. Why? Because it was water mixable. It's water mixable, so you can wash it. You can re-wet it. It's opaque, so you can put it over top of other colors. You can re-wet your palette, unlike acrylic that dries too fast. Unlike oil that never dries, it's rewettable, it's reworkable, it's overworkable, it's underworkable. You can wash it with water and make it a watercolor. You can use it full opaque like an oil paint. It's the most wonderful, versatile paint. And why it's not being used more now is way beyond me. However, I'm here to explain all of the rest about gouache. Cheap, these are inexpensive. Compared to the other paints, very inexpensive. Small, compact. I use these when I travel. When I have a trade show to go to, when I have a workshop to go to, and it's the end of the night and I have nothing to do in a hotel, I can pull out gouache. I can work at the little table and just do some gouache painting, and you don't get paint all over the place. I don't need an easel. I don't need big things. Palette, pad, water, brushes, few tubes of paint, you're good to go. It's compact, travels light, travels easy, and you can paint. Water mixable, dries quick. Paintings go home dry. You don't have to worry about it. Dries quick, you can paint over other colors. You can re-wet your colors. If it dries and you have to go way down the hall to the bathroom to go pee, you come back, you can re-wet it. So both transparent and opaque. Works like a watercolor, works like an oil, works like acrylic. It's got so many versatilities to it. So that's the good. I love that. The bad. You can put the little pucks in your palette anytime you want and pour the paint out, and yes, you can re-wet it. If you re-wet the little blobs of paint that are dry, it's going to more react like a watercolor than it is an opaque oil paint medium or acrylic medium. So blobs of paint are good if you're gonna go thin. If you want to go thick, fresh paint all the time. So yeah, you're always squeezing out a little bit of fresh paint. That gets a little costly. So there's money involved there, though the paint is cheaper. You need some fresh paint to get the opacity and the thick brush marks that you're looking for. So that's one of the problems. And like acrylic, unlike oil, gouache dries darker, and you have to be aware of that. Some colors dry darker than others, some don't dry darker than others, but you've got to get to know which color is which and doing that. And you've got to, trust me, learn to paint way lighter than you need to. And for most paintings anyways, unless you're like dark like William Ray, you need to paint lighter and fresher anyways, okay? So the little cakes in your pan, you can put them in there and you can reuse them. Problem with that is these little cakes sometimes fall out. It's a pain. You close up, dries up, falls out. Here's a tip. Take a little bit of honey, put a dot of honey under that cake and put the cake back in. It'll stay. Honey is water soluble and it works wonderful with gouache. It won't affect it at all, but it sticks your cake back down. Other problem with gouache is most companies don't make all the colors they make in acrylic or in oil or in watercolor. They make limited palette. I am not sure what the reason is, but I'll tell you now, you can't buy manganese blue in gouache anywhere. It kind of drives me crazy. You can't buy pyroline maroon or permanent maroon. Who makes these names up anyways? You can't buy that color. You can't buy cad red deep as far as I know. So there's some colors you cannot get in gouache that you can in other colors. But alas, maybe that's a good thing. Figure out how to make it work. You need to figure out other colors to buy. And aren't we supposed to be creative anyways? And shouldn't we be figuring this out all the time and figure out what colors work? So though it's a pain in the patootie, it's a wonderful thing. So the ugly, gouache and the ugly. Not that it's really ugly about gouache, but it's like anything else. It's a learning curve. You're gonna paint with something that you're not used to. I liken this to music. If you learn music and learn to play the piano, great, you can play the piano. Someone throws you a saxophone, guess what? Notes are all the same, music's all the same, chords are all the same, but the instrument's totally different. And though you may understand all the rules of composition, and you may understand the rules of color theory, and you may understand the rules of pluses and minuses and negative painting and all those wonderful things that go into painting, gouache now needs to be treated in its own manner, just like the saxophone does. You need to relearn it, and it takes a bit of time. There will be a learning curve, but trust me, the learning curve is quick, fun, and you should always be experimenting anyways and having fun with a new medium, because that's what creativity is all about. Like music, it only gets better with time. Trust me, it's going to be ugly at first. You're going to fail, you're going to wobble, and you're going to hate it. Do not abandon it, because that curve is very quick. You will very soon go, oh wait, that worked. Oh, I like this. And you will find the delicacies of gouache and go, wow, I really like this. It's a bit different than what I'm used to, but now I've learned something new and I love it. Couple of tips about gouache that I'll give you that may help you. So the first is, again, the pucks are good. When you're using the pucks dry and you add water, spritzer bottle, spritz them so they re-wet, they'll reactivate. They are going to act like a watercolor. They are not going to act like oil paint or acrylic paint because they're not thick enough. So in the initial stages of a painting, I may use the pucks to put in a few washes. So I want some delicacy. But when I want to get some heavy layered paint, thick paint comes forward, thin paint recedes, I need fresh paint. So on the puck, I squeeze out a little bit of fresh paint. Not a lot, but I've always got a little bit of fresh paint going on. I got a puck on the side that I can dip into that'll give me the watercolory, thin, transparent effect that I'm looking for, but I've got thick opaque paint as well that I can use. Another tip for you, mixing the paint. Well, how much do I mix? Most of the problem with gouache is people seem to think, well, it's a palette. It's like a watercolor palette. I'm on watercolor paper. I'm using watercolor brushes. Then they tend to paint like watercolor, and all you've got is this opaque, dense, drab color going on, whereas watercolor in its own right is one of the most beautiful mediums you can use for paint because the delicacy of it and the transparency of it just glows. Gouache is very opaque and very dense and very heavy. So the two of them combined works wonderfully. So you have to be careful. Gouache is more opaque. Though it can be used fairly transparently, the two of them will work together, but you need some fresh paint to go out. So the consistency, what you're looking for overall, I would say, is sour cream. Imagine pulling out a dollop of sour cream and painting with it. You can thin it or use it like that. That's going to give you the consistency that you're looking for when painting with gouache. One last tip for you. Do not use watercolor brushes, your normal watercolor brushes for gouache. All those guys that tell you, oh, you got to use a sable brush, use a natural hair brush for watercolor. Yes, absolutely for watercolor. Holds a ton of water, releases a ton of water. You can go forever with it. You do not want that with gouache. Holding a ton of water and releasing a ton of water only dilutes the gouache and makes it become a watercolor. You want a synthetic brush that holds a lot of paint, releases minimal amount of paint, and holds the consistency of the gouache. So don't buy expensive brushes. Buy the El Cheapo synthetic brushes. They're going to work better for you in gouache. Gouache Tips 101. Fresh water for mixing. Dirty water for cleaning your brushes. This is the dirty water bin. The dirty water bin has a kitchen scritchy in it to clean your brushes. What's a kitchen scritchy, you ask? You know, the little scritchy thing that goes in the frog's mouth that used to be on your mom's counter on the corner that she always stuffed that little scritchy thing in. This will clean your brushes really well. Consistency with gouache. Little fresh paint out. What is the consistency of gouache? Because it's different than watercolor, and it's not quite, it's a little more like acrylic, which is creamy, a little less thick than oil, but definitely thicker than watercolor. So what is the consistency? Well, let's mix up a color. Take a little bit of blue. See that thinness right there? That's watercolor thinness. You want a little bit more paint. And the wonderful thing about gouache is that you get to add white to it. And as soon as you add white to it, you're going to get a little bit of a somewhat pasty consistency. Well, this pasty consistency that you're getting here, that's what you want right there. This is about the consistency of sour cream. That's all I can, that's how what at least I figured, is that it's this. It's going to beat a little bit, but there's a consistency to it. Notice that my palette is tippy, but this isn't running. So it's not thin enough to run, but it's not so thick that it's sticky and dragging across the watercolor paper. So it's a bit of a trick to get the consistency to where you like it. But the wonderful thing about gouache is you can add water to where it runs and it's very thin, and you can add more paint so that it's got a thicker consistency, and you can get a really big blast of paint with it.
I pulled up top down in the two-seater. She hopped in, drunk smile, said it's good to see you. What you thinking about skipping downtown tonight? Race a coupe back home, grab the four-wheel drive, kicking Church Rock Road up to a tree line. Stop and look at her and say, ready? Better hold on tight. Let me show you my countryside through these old headlights. We can take this road as far as you want to go. I'll show you how a country mile can take us all night. Feeling high in a bull's tail up an old dirt road. I ain't gonna run or hide. We can let the fire burn wild. That's just my countryside. We post up on the bank, drop a tailgate, windows down in the cab, bumping George Strait. We paint a couple lines and we throw them on out. Red Bible ripple bouncing on a cool night. Fire dancing, making shadows in the moonlight. She leans in close in the bed of my truck.